With the release of Stranger Things and It Welcome to Derry, the end of 2025 has been a great time to be alive as a horror fan, and to be very honest, the It prequel show might have given us what is probably the best first season finale of a show. You can't tell me that any of us predicted the big reveals about Pennywise that Andy Muschietti had saved for the end, be it the Marge and Richie Tozier connection, its non-linear time viewing, or the cosmic clown's omnipresence. We don't know about you, but our minds were absolutely blown. Having said that, the biggest question throughout the debut season has been why the Muschiettis are choosing for the show to travel back in time for each season installment. While we have a rather legit theory to answer that question, we'll also talk about which timeline It is going to attack next. So, without wasting another moment, let's get right into it.
Your son!
What makes It omnipresent? Welcome to Derry has been quite an ambitious concept from the get-go, as the show aimed to bring an expanded look at the lore around Pennywise, the child-chomping clown, but of course it's turned out to be so much more than that, because the finale really took everything up several notches. Instead of this just being a random prequel story about what happened when Pennywise last woke up before the events of the It movies, Welcome to Derry made a stunning reveal that sets the show up for the next 2 seasons. We guess you probably already know this, but these new seasons will be set in different time periods than Season 1, while still being connected to the larger story of the It movies. Coming to the final episode of It, Welcome to Derry, we see Pennywise finally choosing to engulf the town with his evil influence as a thick, unnatural fog rolls into town, and with it comes the chaos as children start disappearing all over Derry. As panic spreads, the young losers band together and rush to save their friend Will Hanlon. At the same time, the adults aren't sitting this one out. After realizing that their son was taken by the cosmic clown, Will's parents, Leroy and Charlotte, team up with Dick Halloran, Rose, and Taniel to stop Pennywise for good. Using Halloran's shining abilities to track down the cosmic shard dagger that Taniel had lost, they planned to seal it away once again, but then both groups were dangerously racing against time. Finally, all of their paths collided at a deadwood tree, which basically marked the end of Pennywise's prison, or cage, meaning if he managed to cross that tree, nobody could have stopped him from wreaking havoc across the world. When the loser kids try to fend off the entity with the dagger, Pennywise keeps circling them and then briefly snatches young Marge Truman for a chilling one-on-one conversation. This is when he drops a major revelation that changes how we see everything that was happening in the show. As the cosmic clown specifies, there was a reason why it kept singling Marge and Will out, and as it turns out, Pennywise was targeting her and her fellow losers because after growing up, Marge will fall in love with a Tozier man and have a son named Richie Tozier, who in turn would grow up, find his own group of friends, and ultimately become the reason that leads to its demise. But what Pennywise claims after this is much more shocking, as the entity mentions that for it, time doesn't move in a straight line, as the past, present, and future all exist at once, and the moment the losers kill him is somehow tied to the moment he was first born. Luckily, in the end, Marge, Will, and the others manage to seal Pennywise back inside his cage, thus forcing him into another 27-year-long hibernation before it can wake up to feed again. But this victory doesn't really bring much comfort, because later Marge opens up to Lily Bainbridge about what Pennywise said, and the two girls come to the terrifying realization that if time really is a circle for it, Pennywise could strike again long before any of them were ever born, thus changing the future that defeats him in the first place. And there's just nothing they can do to stop that possibility except for leaving the fight to the people alive during that era. I mean, we all know that there are a plethora of sci-fi shows and movies that deal with the idea of time as a circle rather than a linear path as we perceive it. However, this particular perception of past, present, and future all at once is not technically defined as time travel. Rather, it's a form of omnipresence that allows someone or something to affect their decision-making in the moment based on knowledge of what will be. This is the exact concept of Pennywise's awareness and perception of time that Welcome to Derry has painted. Basically, time, for it, exists in a singular continuum where the past, present, and future all unfold at once. This ability allows him to exist as an overarching force across all past timelines, despite being killed in 2016. To put it more simply, Pennywise is more or less a higher dimensional being who sees time as an ever-present landscape instead of as a series of sequential moments. Sure, the mystery of how Pennywise's death is also his birth is definitely a dangling thread for later seasons to answer, and is also a clear road to possibly bringing the entity back for a new story set after the events of the original It novel. But as for the time hopping for seasons 2 and 3, it's clear that Pennywise would essentially be using his omnipresence, or awareness of future events, and his death to attack the significant characters of the past. We now know that he experiences time in a non-linear fashion, but how that is or why, that's something that the show intends to flesh out in the next 2 seasons. We guess we'll have to wait a few years in order to find out if it can actually change the entire timeline, or how it's managing to go backwards in a linear way, or if it really is an omnipresent god. Given that a third It film has been announced to be released by 2029, it would definitely affect the story we already know, meaning that the Muschiettis are really playing for the big leagues here.
What?
At this point, Welcome to Derry is also a sequel. Apart from opening a whole can of worms, the Welcome to Derry finale has also implied that, shockingly enough, the supposed prequel series might just be a sequel to both It films. Since the beginning, Welcome to Derry was marketed as a prequel to 2017's It Chapter 1 and 2019's It Chapter 2, especially because the franchise was pretty much sure about exploring the origins of the cosmic being that came to Earth and eventually adapted the form of Pennywise the Dancing Clown, while particularly narrowing down on the events that happened in 1962, which is basically one feeding cycle before the first It film, which was set in 1989. In fact, for the first 7 episodes, we were all blissfully under the impression that we were just following the previous cycle, but from the little chat that Pennywise has with Margaret, it seems like Welcome to Derry is actually a sequel to the first 2 feature films. If we go by the way the cosmic clown views time, the events of the 2 movies have already happened. I mean, after revealing that Marge was supposed to grow up and have Richie Tozier as a son, Pennywise also pulled out the same missing poster of Richie that the losers had found in the Neibold house in 1989, thus further implying that the events of both It films had already happened. Marge had absolutely no clue what the clown was yapping about, but like Pennywise, we too have seen the future, just enough to make these connections. All of this basically means that even if the first season of the show is set in 1962, it's possible that it's actually taking place after the events of It Chapter 2 had already happened. So our theory is that after Pennywise was defeated by the Losers Club in 2016, he basically went back in time to prevent his demise, which explains why he targeted characters like Marge and Will Hanlon. In theory, if he could have gone back to 1962 and killed Marge or Will, this would mean that Richie and Mike Hanlon would have never been born, and inevitably, the Losers Club would never have the pleasure of killing Pennywise. Since the Welcome to Derry finale has already confirmed that the concept of linear time does not apply to the cosmic eater of worlds, it's basically alluded to the fact that the show is a sequel to the It movies, which means that all the future seasons of the series will now be seen in a completely different light. Not just that, but before episode 8, we also believed that the following 2 seasons would simply be 2 more prequels to the film and the first season of Welcome to Derry. However, Andy Muschietti really said, "Hold my beer," and flipped the entire script on our faces. With this new revelation, it seems like the future seasons are also sequels within the timeline, meaning the whole trajectory of the show has changed, as Welcome to Derry is no longer simply a Pennywise History 101 course anymore. Our guess is that each season will occur because he will not be successful in the previous one. For example, because It has been temporarily defeated in season 1 of the show, he would basically have to go back to the previous cycle in 1935 and somehow try to prevent the losers of that era from forming or making it out alive. This would not only follow Pennywise being taken down by a whole group of kids, but maybe we'd also see more ancestors of the Losers Club fighting this entity, thus keeping the whole theme of deep-seated generational trauma within Derry going. Whatever it is, Pennywise would have to fail in Season 2 in order for Season 3 to happen, because like Andy has confirmed, the final season will be set in 1908, implying that the Cosmic Clown would have to try again to prevent his death. It almost seems like, in the show, even if time for us humans is moving backwards, it's actually moving forwards for Pennywise, as his actions are a direct result of a cause and effect scenario where, because he was defeated in 2016, he now has to go back to his previous cycles to make sure that particular reality doesn't come to pass, which really makes sense, because if he hadn't been defeated, he would not have to target the particular kids he does in Welcome to Derry. Of course, this reveal was no doubt rather shocking, but it also poses another interesting possibility, which makes you wonder if the events of the first It film were really a prequel to It Chapter 2, or was it simply just another case of the cosmic going back in time to try to change the past? If that really is the case, Chapter 2 would be the only present entry in the entire franchise, which at this point is entirely plausible. We also have another theory that sort of just fits into this whole mess. Do you think that instead of just directly phasing forward in time, Pennywise is using his 27-year feeding cycle to systematically wake up backwards to prevent his demise? Whatever the case may be, It Welcome to Derry Season 1 does not definitively state whether it's possible for Pennywise to stop the Losers Club from killing him, meaning he could just be stuck in a causal loop. But again, he could also be able to change his future by changing his past, which is an entirely plausible notion for a being who exists in the past, present, and future all at once. Like we said, the determinism versus free will debate will undoubtedly undoubtedly be answered in seasons 2 and 3. However, season 1 does make it pretty clear that Pennywise himself believes that he can change the future, and that is really the important part. If our favorite child-chomping clown has any fatal flaw, it's definitely hubris. The interdimensional creature thinks that he's above the whims of mortals, and in a way he's surely right, but this line of thinking could also easily lead to him thinking that he can't be stopped, despite knowing that the Losers Club stops him. Given that Pennywise believes it is possible to change his death, he's going to take necessary steps to stop the Losers Club, even if he fails every single time. Plus, based on his past hubris, he probably won't take his failure to kill Marge as proof that he cannot change the future. The rules of time for Pennywise are extremely murky at this point, so it's unclear whether he could go through a cycle again even after revisiting it. I mean, if that becomes a possibility, doesn't that mean he could just try the black spot cycle again? Even if we don't have all the answers, if it can revisit the same cycle more than once, the losers of every era are in deep shit. Although we do think it's a little too speculative to say whether a time loop is possible at this point, at least we can be certain that Pennywise is definitely trying to prevent his 2019 defeat. Does going backwards in time make Pennywise stronger? At first, we genuinely didn't understand why the 3 seasons would go backwards time-wise, but now what we believe Muschietti is doing is showing Pennywise getting stronger and stronger as the seasons progress. Usually, characters get stronger as they age and gain experience, but since it is a cosmic being, it's as old as time itself. It's possible that through encounters with Dick Halloran, the natives, the losers, Maturin, and I guess now these cosmic pillars or shards, it becomes weaker and weaker. As the show progresses towards future seasons, we know that some part of the show has to progress too, and since it won't be time, we will not be seeing any of the characters we know reprising their roles. So it would make sense if Pennywise actually got stronger with less competition than it has currently. All in all, we'd love to see one season where the characters are simply hopeless and clueless, and we see a true feeding cycle where it is unstoppable. Even if the theory of the cosmic entity getting stronger by going back in time is not outright mentioned in the Stephen King novel, it does align with the book's broader mythology, because even in the source material, Pennywise was at full strength in his earlier cycles, long before his eventual confrontations with the OG Losers Club. I guess the further back you go, the fewer checks there are on it, because there are just fewer psychics, fewer people with the shine, no Maturin interference, and no magical artifacts to weaken it. This actually explains a long-standing quirk where Pennywise appears weaker in the modern-day movies, because by the 1980s it had already endured centuries of resistance. Moreover, the entity is all-knowing, so it would be able to use its increased power to its own benefit. So, with Welcome to Derry continuing to move backwards into 1935, then 1908, we may end up seeing a version of Pennywise far closer to the unrestrained cosmic predator that King had originally envisioned. This is a big possibility, especially after Rose and the Children of Maturin noted how the latest It cycle wasn't as strong as the previous ones. Until Pennywise was woken up from his hibernation by General Shaw, we see that all its conquests were actually much more rabid compared to what we saw in the movies, meaning that it is growing weaker with time. Season 3 will probably be Pennywise at his most evil, as the Ironworks explosion was a big deal in the novel, where it's said to be the most horrifying tragedy of Pennywise's violence. More importantly, we think in 1908, Pennywise would end up doing its death, the result of which would ultimately culminate in It Chapter 3, which has been slated for 2029. Can Pennywise even be killed? Okay, humorous here, but since Pennywise has been killed in 2016 during the events of It Chapter 2, it's safe to assume that he doesn't exist beyond that year. However, according to Welcome to Derry, his perception of time allows him to exist across all times in the years before that. So, in order to be able to achieve immortality in a future beyond 2016, Pennywise would have to travel further back in time and kill Marge and Richie Tozier's ancestors, which would ensure that they're never born. While this twist adds an intriguing layer of unconventional time travel to the franchise, it also creates many paradoxes and time loop plot holes. For instance, if Pennywise were to successfully erase the loser's ancestors from existence, the very events that led to his defeat in 2016 would never occur. But if the 2016 events never happened, why would he even feel compelled to alter the timeline in the first place? It would be interesting to see whether the show's future installments answer these questions. Also, this creates a causality collapse where if Pennywise can already perceive and exist across all pre-2016 timelines simultaneously, then any attempt to change the past should already be reflected in the timeline he experiences. In other words, if he ever succeeded in altering history to secure his survival beyond 2016, the version of reality where he dies in It Chapter 2 should have never existed in the first place because his need to change the past already contradicts the idea that he sees all outcomes at once. Not to mention, if Pennywise can alter the future and kill one generation of losers, wouldn't that completely invalidate the movie's events? On the other hand, if the franchise's events happen in a closed deterministic loop, Pennywise has no chance of winning in any timeline. This not only diminishes the overarching threat of the being, but also significantly reduces the stakes. We think the obvious way to kill Pennywise would be to destroy it at its source, when it falls to Earth from the fallen star. However, that would be impossible because humans didn't even exist when Pennywise first landed on the planet. This means that each previous generation, up until the earliest humans who encountered it, just needs to keep fighting and killing Pennywise to ensure he doesn't alter the overarching timeline. Now, if It Welcome to Derry dares to dig deeper into the high-concept sci-fi domain, it could possibly introduce the idea of trapping Pennywise in some form of time isolation where he can no longer perceive or alter time. Or, as seen in the season finale, someone with the shining powers, like Dick Halloran, could get into its head and make it believe it's not a cosmic being. That trick could force it to exist like a human and perceive time linearly, thus taking away its ability to exist across every timeline all at once.
Oh, I think they see you too.
Which timeline is It going to attack next? According to Andy Muschietti himself, Season 2 will specifically focus on the actual human Pennywise, Bob Gray, and his daughter Ingrid in the 1930s. Welcome to Derry Season 1 provided a brief flashback to the night Pennywise killed Bob and took his form in 1908, as well as Ingrid choosing to sacrifice children to the entity, believing it to be her father, ever since their encounter in 1935. But there's definitely more story there to tell, and Andy Muschietti knows it. Apparently, we're going to learn a lot of things about it, especially how it manipulated Ingrid and how she became a tragic set piece of the entity's horrors, making her the victim and the perpetrator all at once. As we know, Ingrid was tricked into believing that it was her father, and she wanted to liberate him, but the only way to see him and try to liberate him was by turning children into bait that would compel Pennywise to show up and feed. With that in mind, it quickly becomes apparent that Welcome to Derry has a larger vision of the series mapped out because we think all of these loose story threads being teased for Season 2 connect to subplots of Season 1, like Ingrid's forbidden affair with Hank Grogan and her abusive marriage that previously felt rushed or dropped. Having said that, we can be 100% sure that the 1935 cycle will include one major event. Season 1 has already teased the existence of the Bradley Gang massacre from 1935 when General Shaw and Dick Halloran dug out the gang's car with their skeletons still inside. Now, for those who don't know the story, in Stephen King's novel, the documentation of this massacre really held up a mirror to town violence in the wake of Pennywise. In the book's timeline, the Bradley Gang was led by Al and George Bradley, who were notorious criminals regularly involved in bank robberies and other illicit activities in Derry during the late 20s. They would not only rob stores, but also murder their owners, which became the ultimate catalyst as their reign of terror ended in a violent confrontation with the people of Derry, right when Pennywise woke up from his 27-year hibernation to feed again. Apparently, in the year 1929, the gang's crimes reached a tipping point, and as Pennywise began to haunt Derry again, the good people of the town were viscerally wrapped under his influence. Then, one day, Al and his brother George, along with the 6 other men in their gang, went to an ammunition store and placed a massive order, which they were supposed to pick up the next day. Of course, the store owner immediately recognized them and so alerted the sheriff of Derry about how the Bradley Gang will probably hit one of the banks in town very soon. It wasn't long before this information rapidly spread across town, causing quite an uproar as over 50 men armed themselves to the brim and waited inside the stores near the intersection by the bank when the Bradley Gang's cars arrived. In broad daylight, right as the gang members stepped out into the middle of the street, all the armed men who were waiting, including the sheriff, immediately began to fire and didn't stop until every last member of the Bradley Gang was dead. Both George and Al, along with their wives, were supposedly shot in the head at point blank from an armed shotgun. Plus, 2 relatively innocent women also lost their lives in this heated exchange, but the locals just didn't care as they casually brushed that off by calling them a couple of whores. Not only that, but many town residents also saw a clown shooting the same gun they'd been using, but each of them saw him at different locations in Derry during the shootout. One person even recalled seeing him floating outside a window, which means that Pennywise was collectively influencing all 50 people involved in this massacre at the same time. When the massacre ended, the bodies of the gang members, along with the few civilians who were caught in the crossfire, were just left in the streets and waterways where they were left exposed to the elements. The grotesque sight of the dead bodies floating in the drains and rivers became a symbol of the unchecked violence and the town's slow descent into decay. Just like that, this mass murder was also covered up rather abruptly, with the people people of Derry choosing to remain silent about the shooting and simply turning an eye to the evidence right in front of them. On top of that, the shootout took place near the well house, which has a direct connection to the sewers of Derry, so of course this has Pennywise written all over it. This incident had lasting effects on this cursed town and is considered one of the high points of horror in Derry's history, thus contributing to the unnerving cycle of violence and fear that feeds the entity residing in the sewers. If you ask us, Season 2 might just open with the Bradley Gang massacre and only get more horrifying from there. In fact, we think Ingrid Kirsch is going to be the catalyst, as she does have a habit of snitching just so Pennywise can be attracted to a site of inexplicable violence. But that's just our 2 cents. What do you guys think? Let us know in the comments down below.